Shinzou Sasageyo! Shinzou Sasageyo! Shinzou Sasageyo!
Perhaps the most striking portrait of war's corrosion is embodied by Commander Erwin Smith. Erwin is everything a leader should be: charismatic, intelligent, fearless. His speeches rally men to fight impossible odds, and his strategies often pull humanity back from the brink. Last time, we explored the cultural phenomenon of Attack on Titan's masterpiece, diving into its narrative brilliance, intricate foreshadowing, and how it mirrors real-world issues like cyclical hatred and systemic oppression. We followed Eren Yeager's transformation from a curious kid to a tragic figure shaped by trauma. And we unpacked Reiner Braun's complex arc as a soldier torn between duty and guilt. That was just the beginning. In part 2, we're picking up right where we left off, diving deeper into the moral ambiguities, the devastating consequences of war, and the series' unflinching look at humanity's flaws. I urge you to go watch the part 1 first, then come back here. So now that's out of the way, grab a seat and let's continue unraveling the world of Attack on Titan. To many, he's the very image of the ideal military hero, but underneath that noble veneer lies a deeply conflicted man. He is not just fighting titans, he's chasing a ghost. As a child, Erwin questioned the official history taught on the island. His father, a teacher, shared his doubts and paid with his life. That act of silencing sparked a fire in Erwin. He didn't join the military simply to serve mankind, he did it to uncover the truth. The Titans, the walls, the lost history of Eldia. He was driven to peel back every lie, and as he rose through the ranks, his noble mission slowly curdled. The idealist gave way to the pragmatist, and finally to the war tactician willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for a glimpse of the truth. Erwin's genius as a strategist came with a cost. He sent men to die without hesitation, often knowing full well that they wouldn't return. He led suicidal charges, not out of recklessness, but because he believed that only in the chaos of battle could secrets be pried from the grip of fate. His ability to manipulate others, even his most loyal subordinates, became a tool in his arsenal. He used hope as a weapon. He gave people something to believe in, while silently wondering if his own motives were selfish. Was he trying to save humanity, or was he just a boy still chasing his father's question? 2. In Attack on Titan, even the most revered figures are shown to be morally compromised. The story doesn't let us cling to clean archetypes. Everyone is tainted. Everyone is tested. The glory of the military is exposed for what it often is: a brutal machine fueled by idealism and maintained by sacrifice. Every soldier who marches beyond the walls leaves behind a piece of their humanity. The war in Attack on Titan doesn't just take lives, it erodes souls. It turns boys into killers, commanders into manipulators, and martyrs into monsters. There are no clean hands in this world, only survivors and the ghosts they carry. Erwin Smith, like many of Isayama's characters, is not simply a man, he is a symbol. His arc mirrors one of the most striking figures in video game storytelling, Big Boss from Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid saga. Both are soldiers forged in the fires of idealism, only to be consumed by the very systems they sought to defy. Big Boss began as a loyal patriot, fighting for his country and the values he believed in. But when he was ordered to assassinate his mentor, the boss, for the sake of a state lie, something inside him fractured. That betrayal didn't just change him, it redefined him. To carry forward her legacy, he turned to mercenarism, building a private army unbound by nations or politics. His dream was to free humanity from manipulation and state control. But good intentions, when tangled with violence and vengeance, tend to rot. Over time, the original Snake, the hero, faded. In his place stood a man willing to sacrifice anything, including his comrades, to defeat the machine that betrayed him. In Metal Gear Solid V, the phantom pain, this descent reaches its final stage. Big Boss doesn't just deceive his enemies or allies, he deceives the player. Kojima's narrative genius lies in making us complicit. We don't just witness Big Boss's transformation, we embody it. What begins as a fight for justice becomes a slow, inescapable corruption. The battlefield strips away honor until only pain and pragmatism remain. This is precisely where Erwin Smith resides in Attack on Titan. At first glance, he's the perfect military leader, calm, brilliant, courageous. But underneath that image is a man driven by obsession. Erwin's quest for truth, sparked by his father's murder, becomes his war. 2. He climbs the ranks not to liberate humanity, but to answer a personal question. And like Big Boss, Erwin becomes willing to sacrifice everything, including the lives of his men, because he can't even be sure is just. Honor is a convenient illusion in both these stories. On the battlefield, it holds no real power. Morality becomes a tool, a mask. Behind it is only necessity, survival, and loss. Both Erwin and Big Boss are consumed by the very wars they try to master. They don't just fight in the name of peace, too. They perpetuate war because peace would render their existence meaningless. There's a dark irony in that. As a lifelong Metal Gear fan, I can't help but remember Kojima's haunting experiment in the Phantom Pain. The game introduced the idea of a global anti-nuclear ending. If every player on Earth dismantled the nuclear weapons from their in-game bases, a hidden pacifist ending would unlock. On paper, the premise was simple. In reality, it was impossible. Some players hoarded nukes to maintain dominance. Others infiltrated enemy bases using non-lethal tactics, hoping to dismantle the weapons peacefully. But over time, idealism gave way to desperation. As peaceful methods failed, the most devoted players grew more ruthless. By the end, many who once played as silent pacifists became digital warlords, destroying others with the same weapons they sought to erase. The anti-nuclear dream collapsed under the weight of human nature, ambition, fear, control. That was Kojima's final lesson. Those who live by war cannot escape becoming monsters. Even in a video game, peace remained out of reach, not because of programming limitations, but because the players themselves failed. We failed. Erwin's arc delivers the same truth. He is a man haunted by the corpses that paved his road to knowledge. His charisma and courage never absolve him of the lives he sacrificed. Like Big Boss, he becomes a tragic figure, consumed by the very cause he once served. The idealist becomes the executor. The savior becomes the strategist, and when his final charge comes, not to save the world, but to give meaning to his long, bloody march, it feels both heroic and hollow. In the end, both Attack on Titan and Metal Gear Solid ask the same unforgiving question. Can a man devote his life to war without becoming what he fights against? And they offer the same answer. No, because in building a life on the machinery of death, the cost is always one's humanity. What ultimately separates Erwin Smith from many others in Attack on Titan is not his intelligence, leadership, or even his charisma. It is the moment of clarity he achieves at the end of his journey. During the ferocious battle for the reconquest of Shiganshina, when the truth he has long pursued lies just within reach, Erwin is struck by a devastating realization he has not been fighting for humanity, but for himself. For years, he told himself and his men that their sacrifices were necessary for the survival of the species, for justice, for truth. But in that final moment, standing on the corpses of those who followed him without question, he sees the contradiction. He used the rhetoric of hope to justify a path paved by ambition. He has not led out of pure conviction for the cause, but out of a desperate need to validate his father's death and satisfy his obsession with knowledge. The irony is cruel. His soldiers, many of them children who idolized him, believed they were fighting to save the world while their commander was driven by a personal ghost. This confrontation with his own hypocrisy is what elevates Erwin beyond the archetype of the noble general. In a final conversation with Levov Ackerman, his most loyal comrade, we see a man stripped of illusion. He confesses, not just with words, But through the suicidal charge he leads against the Beast Titan, that charge is not a tactic, it is an act of atonement. He sacrifices himself not to win the war, but to make peace with the war within. In a torrent of blood and fire, the demon that humanity needed dies. But Attack on Titan offers no victory music, no clean triumph. It refuses to romanticize the carnage. Where so many stories glorify battle, Isayama's tale tears down that illusion piece by piece. There are no super saiyans here, no miraculous recoveries, no rivals turned into cheerful allies. This is not a world of clear-cut villains and heroic redemption arcs. The characters of Attack on Titan are battered, compromised, and deeply human. The battlefield doesn't make them stronger, it eats them alive. The trauma lingers, reshaping their thoughts, their values, their sense of self. And no one embodies this descent more tragically than Eren Yeager. Eren is not the noble warrior of a traditional shonen story. He does not rise from loss to bring peace to the world. He begins as a normal child, living in ignorance on Paradise Island until the brutal truth of his reality crashes through his wall and into his home. In a matter of seconds, he loses everything, watching helplessly as his mother is devoured. From that moment, his path is set, not by destiny, but by rage. Unlike Erwin, who gradually comes to see the cost of war, Eren becomes defined by it. His pain, once raw and childlike, curdles into vengeance. First it's the Titans. Then, when he learns the truth, it becomes the rest of the world. He doesn't seek peace, he wants retribution. He doesn't mourn his mother, he wants to obliterate those responsible. Eren never really hides this side of himself. As a child, when he kills human traffickers to save Mikasa, his response isn't horror, it's satisfaction. He sees enemies as things to be exterminated. This is what makes Attack on Titan so chillingly authentic. Eren's transformation is not a twist. It's inevitable. What happens to him is a textbook case of radicalization. An innocent boy exposed to atrocity, whose anger is reinforced again and again by every new betrayal, every new enemy, every new horror. The world feeds his rage, and he grows into the monster it made him. Isayama doesn't shy away from showing how that happens. The world Eren grows up in never gives him space to grieve or heal, only to fight. War becomes the lens through which he understands everything. And Attack on Titan shows that no one walks through hell and comes out whole. On both Paradise Island and the mainland, we see how trauma, fear, and indoctrination turn people into weapons. Where many stories treat death as a stepping stone to growth, Isayama treats it as it is, something that corrodes. Every loss in this story leaves a scar. The Exploration Battalion doesn't train warriors. They churn out the walking wounded. And the deeper into the story we go, the clearer it becomes that no one is untouched. Not Rainer, not Mikasa, not Armin, not even the strongest soldier alive. Certainly not Eren. By the end, Attack on Titan makes it impossible to believe in the fantasy of noble war. It tells us again and again, war is not a proving ground. It's a furnace. It forges monsters, and it leaves ruins. And if you're lucky, it lets you die before you become the thing you hate. The Eldians confined to internment zones under Marley control are raised in a world that demands they hate themselves. From childhood, too, they're taught that their blood is cursed, that their ancestors were demons, too, and that redemption lies only in loyal servitude to the empire that oppresses them. This indoctrination doesn't just create obedience. It manufactures hatred, weaponizes identity, and fuels a self-perpetuating cycle of violence kept alive by those in power who never set foot on the battlefield. Gabi Braun, Reiner's cousin and one of the most promising candidates for inheriting a Titan, is perhaps the clearest parallel to Eren Yeager. Like him, she's a child molded by a hostile world, a product of propaganda, loss, and fear. For Gabi, the inhabitants of Paradise Island are monsters, soulless devils who once plunged the world into chaos and who, if given the chance, would do so again. In this way, her hatred of them mirrors the way young Eren once saw the Titans, not as individuals, not even as enemies, just as things that had to be destroyed. Both children were born into trauma. Both were taught that their survival depended on eradicating a faceless other. Both bore witness to violence that only deepened their rage. Eren, watching his mother devoured by a Titan, Gabi seeing her friends killed in the assault on Liberio. Neither asked to inherit the burdens of history, but both became products of it. Their stories are not isolated. They are reflections of each other, born in different lands but shaped by the same fire. The tragedy lies in how normal it all seems. A trail of gunpowder stretching back generations where each spark is answered with a greater one, each death begetting a dozen more. So consumed are we by the question of who started it that no one ever stops to ask, how do we end it? As I write these words, it's impossible to ignore the haunting real-world parallel, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. Reignited with horrifying violence since October 7, the attacks perpetrated by Hamas are acts of terrorism that defy human decency. And yet, we cannot ignore the world that shapes such desperation. Gazan children, hemmed in by fences, walls, and war, grow up never having seen Israelis as anything other than armed occupiers. They are born into siege, raised on suffering, and too often abandoned by a global community that turns its eyes away. What then becomes of such a child? Like Eren, they may grow up unable to see the humanity of the other side. Like Gabi, they may act not out of inherent malice, but because they've been taught to fear before they could ever learn to understand. In such conditions, monsters are not born, they are made. And they are often made in silence. This is the corrosive logic of war. The other is stripped of their face, their name, their childhood. They are no longer a person, but a symbol, a threat, a demon. To destroy them becomes not just acceptable, but necessary. And this thinking ensures the conflict never ends. It simply changes shape generation after generation. Yet Attack on Titan does not offer only despair. Amid the rubble of war, it presents fragile possibilities, cracks in the armor where empathy might still enter. Gabi, despite her initial extremism, is one of those possibilities. Where Eren dives deeper into his rage, Gabi pauses when faced with contradiction. She begins to see the people of Paratus not as monsters, but as humans with stories, fears, and grief like hers. Her transformation is not instant. It is hard-won and incomplete, but it is real. In this, she becomes a symbol of the potential buried within all of us to listen, to reflect, and to change. She represents both the worst of what hatred can create and the best of what understanding can redeem. She is proof that the cycle can be broken, too, but only when we choose to see the other as something more than an enemy. It is not enough to condemn violence. We must interrogate the systems and ideologies that breed it. Whether in fiction or reality, the path forward lies not in vengeance, but in dialogue, too. Empathy and a shared commitment to break the chain. If Attack on Titan teaches us anything, too, it is that the monsters we fight are often the echoes of the ones we've already become. The rise and fall of humanity, Attack on Titan is far more than a chronicle of war and vengeance. It is, above all, a dissection of the human condition, where games like Nier construct melancholic monuments to lost glory in post-human worlds. Isayama's story offers no such romanticism. He doesn't mourn a noble species lost to time. He holds a mirror to humanity and asks a chilling question: what if the monsters we fear are simply who we've always been? Throughout history, every cause, however righteous in intent, has found its justification in blood. We have killed in the name of kings, for gods etched in sacred texts, for liberation, for justice, for love, for revenge. It seems almost as if violence is not an aberration, but an instinct, something primal and deeply rooted within us, and worse still, it is often exalted. Attack on Titan suggests that humankind is engaged in a perpetual search for narratives that legitimize its savagery. Whether cloaked in patriotism, 2, religion, or vengeance, our wars are often less about the ends they claim to serve and more about satisfying the fundamental impulse to destroy. And yet, within that same darkness, Isayama finds slivers of light. Grace persists, even amid slaughter, cruelty, and despair. There are quiet moments of compassion, friendship, and love that hold the story and the world together. Between battles and betrayals, we see the characters laugh, share meals, tell jokes, and offer comfort. These small, tender moments are fleeting, but they are necessary. They are reminders that despite our capacity for horror, we are not without hope. In fact, it is precisely this fragile beauty that later becomes the one thing powerful enough to restrain Eren from engulfing the world in a final apocalyptic purge. Is this, then, the paradox of humanity? That within our bloodlust lies the potential for redemption. That even as we build new engines of war, we still reach for each other in the dark. The story never offers a definitive answer. Instead, it presents a world where beauty and brutality exist side by side, often in the same breath. Consider the ice cream scene in Dawn of Humanity, a rare moment of innocent joy in a world heavy with dread. The Survey Corps, having crossed the ocean for the first time, marvel at a bustling city filled with technologies and luxuries they've never known. As they wander, laughing and childlike, they discover something so simple and universal, it stuns them: ice cream. For a brief instant, they are just young people tasting the sweetness of life, untouched by war or fear. But Attack on Titan never lets us rest in illusion. That same moment of wonder is swiftly shattered. A local merchant accuses a small boy, clearly of foreign, perhaps Eastern descent, of stealing. The crowd that gathers does not see a child, they see a thief, a threat, a symbol of impurity. Their rage is immediate, and their cruelty is casual. Some suggest punishment, cut off a hand, maybe both, especially if the boy carries Eldian blood. The scene is brief, but it rips open the truth. Beneath the glitter of civilization lies the same old hatred. The world may have progressed, but its heart remains unchanged. This single incident encapsulates the tragedy Attack on Titan seeks to expose. No matter how far humanity believes it has come, it continues to fall in the same ways. The joy of ice cream and the horror of mob violence exist side by side, just as compassion and hatred coexist within each person. We are not defined by one or the other, but by the terrifying proximity between the two. Eren Yeager's arc and the story's broader narrative ultimately ask us this: can humanity ever outgrow its appetite for violence? Or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns forever, dressing up our bloodlust in new flags, new ideologies, new justifications? The answers remain as murky as ever. But what Attack on Titan makes achingly clear is that if salvation is possible, it won't come from victory or vengeance. It will come from the smallest acts of tenderness, the hardest kind of courage, the courage to choose peace, even when everything in us cries out for war. Technological advancement is often seen as a beacon of human potential, a sign of civilization evolving, of comfort replacing hardship. But Attack on Titan, like the real world, reminds us that progress rarely comes untainted. The industrial leaps made possible on Paradis Island, too, fueled by the cooperation of mainland dissidents and sympathetic factions hoping to break free from Marley rule, could have ushered in a new age of prosperity. Engines, mechanized tools, and communication systems held the promise of transforming daily life on the island. Yet, the trajectory of this progress quickly soared. Rather than turning their gaze towards civil upliftment, Paradis chose to weaponize its newfound knowledge. Engines became instruments of war. Manufacturing turned to the mass production of firearms. And defense blurred indistinguishably into aggression. The line between safeguarding the island and preparing for conquest disappeared almost overnight. As Paradis stepped onto the world stage, it was no longer simply reacting to existential threats. It was preparing to impose its will. This marks a pivotal moment in the story, when the island's people must confront a harrowing question: Are we witnessing the end of the world as we knew it, or the beginning of an entirely new one? Every leap forward carries with it a shadow. Every metal, its reverse. This isn't a new phenomenon. History is filled with examples where humanity's most brilliant minds have contributed to its darkest tools of destruction. Albert Einstein revolutionized our understanding of space-time. Robert Oppenheimer helped unlock the secrets of the cosmos. But both names are inextricably linked to the Manhattan Project, the genesis of the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer's haunting words, taken from the Bhagavad Gita, echo through time as a testament to this duality. Scientific genius and moral chaos are not mutually exclusive. The same hands that explore the stars can craft weapons of annihilation. Why? Because humans are not purely rational beings. We are ruled as much by our instincts, fears, and traumas as by our intellect. And when threatened, especially collectively, we tend to fall back on the most primal of responses, eliminate the enemy before he eliminates us. Revolutions throughout history, for all their noble beginnings, often collapse under the weight of this paranoia. The French and Russian revolutions both began with calls for liberty and justice, only to spiral into violence and tyranny. Trotsky's later admission about the Bolsheviks' massacre of the Russian imperial family was chilling, not just in its brutality, but in its intent to sow fear, prevent dissent, and cement dominance. Paradis Island is no exception. The uprising led by General Darius Zackley, Commander Pixis, and Erwin Smith was on the surface a push for transparency and empowerment, a coup to dethrone the royal family and return sovereignty to the people, and for a time, it worked. The fall of the monarchy ended a regime of secrecy, setting the stage for technological progress and the reconquest of Shiganshina. The island eradicated the last roaming titans. It could have ended there. It should have ended there. But opening the gates to the outside world also opened the door to a new cycle of fear and militarism. Foreign technologies arrived thanks to alliances with Marley rebels and the nation of Hizaru, but so did the looming awareness of global hostility. That anxiety hardened Paradis. Over time, it transformed into a state defined less by progress and more by militant nationalism. A dream of survival turned into a nightmare of supremacy. At the heart of this descent is Eren Yeager. In a different life, he might have marveled at engines and printing presses with the same awe as his friends. He might have felt hope. But Eren is already far gone, burdened by the weight of Grisha Yeager's memories, and the future he knows is barreling toward him. He becomes detached from everything that once grounded him. What remains is not the determined boy who swore to protect his people. It is a ghost, a fractured figure shackled not by chains, but by knowledge, the kind that robs a man of choice. Eren's obsession with freedom becomes the cruelest paradox. In trying to free his people, he becomes enslaved to an outcome he feels is inevitable. The boy who once yearned to see the sea is now the man condemned to drown the world in blood. Isayama uses this arc to articulate one of the great philosophical dilemmas of modern civilization, that technological and political progress, absent empathy and reflection, risks becoming merely another form of domination. As with Einstein and Oppenheimer, the greatest breakthroughs come not just with power, but with unbearable weight. Paradis wanted to step into the light of the future. Instead, it stumbled deeper into the abyss. Slave to Freedom, the very first episode of Attack on Titan bears the title, To You. 2,000 years from now. At the time, it seemed poetic, cryptic, maybe even arbitrary. Only in hindsight does it reveal itself as a haunting thesis for the entire narrative, a story not merely of titans and vengeance, but of cycles, bondage, and a warped pursuit of freedom. At the center of it all is not just Eren Yeager, but a girl lost to time, Ymir, the founder of all titans, the original slave of history. Ymir was no deity, no chosen savior. She was a child, a girl born into brutality, a nameless slave to a primitive tribe bearing harsh resemblance to ancient Germanic cultures. One day, she let the tribe's pigs escape. Whether by accident or rebellion, we cannot say. But the punishment she received was far more symbolic than punitive. The tribe's warlord, King Fritz, declared her free. That freedom, however, was a twisted joke. She was given liberty only to be hunted down like an animal, pursued through the forest by her captors. Bleeding and exhausted, Ymir sought refuge in the hollow of a massive tree. There, she encountered a mysterious, parasitic entity, something ancient and otherworldly that bonded with her. From this trauma and despair was born the first Titan, a grotesque embodiment of pain given flesh. But even with this immense power, Ymir remained incapable of rising against her tormentor. Conditioned by fear, subservience, and emotional chains, she used her gift not to rebel, but to serve. She built his empire, crushed his enemies, and bore his children. And when she finally died, throwing herself in the path of an assassin's spear to save the very man who enslaved her, her nightmare only deepened. Death was not her release. King Fritz demanded that her daughters devour her body to preserve her power. In doing so, he forged the Axis, or Paths, an interdimensional network that links all Eldians through blood, memory, and Titan power. Ymir's soul became bound to this realm, where she toiled for 2,000 years, silently constructing Titans, endlessly serving a lineage that never mourned her, never saw her as more than a tool. She was waiting for someone, not a savior, but a kindred soul who would not just understand her pain, but validate it. That person was Eren Yeager. Eren is not a classic hero. He doesn't bring peace or restore order. He carries hatred in his blood and trauma in his bones. But it is precisely that fury, that refusal to forgive a cruel world, that finally resonates with Ymir like her. He has been stripped of innocence, his freedom mocked and redefined by others. And like her, he becomes an avatar of vengeance. Eren becomes the first to truly see Ymir, not as a deity or monster, but as a girl robbed of choice. And when he asks her to lend him her power, not as a king commanding his subject, but as a broken soul asking another for help, she complies. Not because he is righteous, but because he gives her what no one else ever did, a decision. In that moment, she does not follow Eren. She chooses him. That's how the curse ends. Not with a spell, not with violence, but with will, with one slave recognizing another and deciding they will be chained no longer. The Titan she gives him, the attack Titan, is itself a symbol of resistance. It's the only one of the 9 whose gift isn't power or defense or destruction. Its trait is memory, the ability to see the future through the eyes of a successor. This is the ultimate rebellion. In a world that thrives on control, secrecy, and inheritance, the attack Titan is a glitch in the system, a Titan that breaks the timeline, fractures causality, and defies the idea that destiny is fixed. But freedom, as Attack on Titan reveals, is a complex prison. Eren may have freed Ymir, but in doing so, he became enslaved to his own vision of liberation. Bound by inherited memories, driven by inevitability, and fueled by rage, he marches toward destruction under the illusion of choice. In seeking to break the cycle, he becomes its most terrifying agent. The tragedy of Ymir and Eren is not that they failed to be free. It's that in trying to become free, they gave everything to a world that was never built to give it back. Eren's obsession with freedom grew alongside a deepening contempt for humanity's passivity, their willingness to live like cattle, lulled by the safety of towering walls, blind to the slaughter that awaited them beyond. From a young age, he was keenly aware of his confinement. His neighborhood, encased in concentric stone prisons, stood as a constant reminder of what he could never touch: the sky, the sea, the unknown. This boiling frustration fermented into a quiet, corrosive rage. He didn't want safety. He wanted escape, to be more than a bird in a cage. The tragedy of obsession is that it cannot be undone. It grows with its host, feeding on every slight and setback. Eren is no exception. He was never content with what he had. He was never supposed to be. Even he knew it. When Levi faced the impossible choice between saving Erwin or Armin, Eren didn't plead for the commander. Instead, he told the truth. Armin, he said, was the dreamer, the only one who believed in something more than death. Eren's own mind, by contrast, had always been shackled to war and vengeance. His descent into the role of humanity's executioner happens in two brutal revelations. The first is through his father's notebooks, which shatter his naive beliefs about the world. Everything he thought he was fighting for was a lie. The enemy wasn't the Titans, it was the truth. The second revelation comes when he kisses Historia's hand, unlocking the full scope of the attack Titan's power. In that moment, Eren sees not only the memories of his predecessors, but also the future he will carve, and the terrifying realization that he is the one who sets it all in motion. By accepting the royal bloodline's link to the founding Titan, he becomes the linchpin between past and future. The burden of history, of fate itself, is dropped squarely onto his shoulders. From this point on, Eren Yeager ceases to be a man. He becomes an idea, a force suspended across time. He is present in every moment, past and future. His consciousness stretched and fragmented by the combined weight of the founding and attack Titans. Like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen, Eren drifts further from humanity as his omniscience grows. He sees too much, knows too much. And in that knowledge, he loses choice. He is no longer free. He is bound to a single fixed outcome, one he must now ensure unfolds exactly as it was shown to him. In this tragic loop, too, he becomes both author and prisoner of his own story. He sees the future, sends it back to the past, and thus ensures that it happens. The act of revealing it is what makes it real. The Eren who appeared cold, distant, and detached in the later chapters was not callous. He was haunted by knowledge no one should possess, haunted by futures he cannot alter, haunted by a history that depends on him becoming a monster. His compassion, which once flickered with intensity, dims beneath the weight of inevitability. We see glimpses of it when he mourns the Titans roaming aimlessly on Paradis, recognizing them as his own people, victims of the same cursed bloodline. We understand why joy slips through his fingers, why he begins to vanish into himself. He is the boy from Shiganshina who now carries 2 millennia of rebellion, rage, and sorrow on his back. The scene where Eren stares into a mirror, repeating, fight, like a mantra, gains new meaning. It's not just a call to action, it's a message broadcast through time, echoing through every past bearer of the attacked Titan. A desperate plea, a warning, a doctrine. It's the cursed creed of a man who knows that to pause is to perish, and that the only way out is through. Seen from a distance, Eren Yeager could easily be mistaken for a cold-blooded architect of genocide, an odious figure who meticulously set every piece in motion. But this perception flattens the truth. Eren is not simply the master of events, he is also their prisoner. The more we see of him, the clearer it becomes he is a man haunted by what he's seen, and even more so by what he cannot change. When Willie Tybur declares on stage, "I don't want to die because I was born into this world," Eren's reaction says everything. Those exact words, down to the intonation, had once come from his own lips. The shock of hearing them, spoken back to him, by another confirms what he already fears. Everything is set. Every step, every death, every scream predetermined. The future doesn't unfold, it replays. He isn't marching forward freely. He's retracing his own footsteps, locked in a loop of inevitable devastation. Perhaps, in another life, he could have made a different choice. He dreams fleetingly of vanishing into the woods with Mikasa, living out the brief years he has left in quiet peace. But the world won't allow it. Every time he tries to reach for peace, something drags him back to the blood-soaked script he's already read. When Sasha dies, his first question isn't why, but what were her last words? As if trying to confirm that the vision still holds. When he sees Ramsey, a child about to be beaten by a crowd, he tries to walk away. He knows he'll kill this same boy when he unleashes the rumbling. Yet, something in him still reaches out and saves him for now. These moments aren't acts of hope. They're acts of mourning. Eren becomes a ghost in his own body, floating through overlapping timelines, endlessly rewatching his own tragedy. The more he tries to resist, the more tightly fate binds him, so he resigns himself. The only way out, the only way to fulfill the future he's seen, is to raise the world. Not for power, not out of hatred alone, but because destruction in his mind is the last absurd hope of ending the ancient cycle of vengeance and blood that gave rise to everything. He becomes a monster not out of joy, but out of despair. Even then, even with the power of the founding Titan in his grasp, he never truly chooses omnipotence. He doesn't stop Armin, Mikasa, or the others when they come for him. He allows them to fight him, to judge him. He could halt their advance with a single thought, and yet he doesn't. This isn't just tactical mercy, it's a plea for death. His genocide, as horrifying as it is, becomes an inverted sacrifice, too. Not to save the world, but to force it to confront itself. In pushing his friends to stop him, Eren offers them the one thing he has long since lost to, the power to choose. In the end, Eren Yeager is no hero, but he's not quite a villain either. He is the embodiment of a terrible paradox, someone who destroys everything in a futile attempt to build something better. A child who ran from cages all his life, only to build the largest cage of all around himself. His is a story of sorrow disguised as savagery, of genocide born not just from hate, but from the twisted, desperate hope that this time, it might be the last. Eren Yeager is the author of his own tragedy, a man who writes his story in blood, paradox, and unbearable burden. He is both victim and villain, both the world's final hope and its greatest horror. In choosing to embrace evil for what he believed was a greater good, he condemned himself, knowing that only through absolute destruction could the cycle of vengeance and Titan domination be shattered. Without the horrors he unleashed, the peoples of the world might never have stood together. Without his cruelty, the cries of Ymir might never have been heard. But none of this absolves him. He is not just a tragic savior caught in destiny's grip. He is also the monster who made the choice to surrender to his worst impulses, letting fear rot his soul. He could have turned away. He could have chosen love, dialogue, or hope, but he didn't. Eren is a walking contradiction, a child's rage wrapped in a man's conviction, a revolt against an unjust world that ends up mirroring the very injustice he sought to destroy. His complexity fascinates as much as it disturbs. The brilliance of his tragedy doesn't erase the truth. With or without justification, he would have destroyed everything. That's what he confesses to Armin in their final conversation. He is broken, scattered across past, present, and future, barely able to explain the pull that led him to ruin. Even if I hadn't known, you'd stop me. I think I'd have devastated the world regardless. I would have wiped out the whole earth. It is in these words that his soul is laid bare. There was no divine mission, no strategic clarity, only a compulsion, an emptiness, a soul corroded by helplessness masquerading as power. The dream of seeing the world, of being free, had long since soared. From atop his Titan form, taller than any mountain, he could see everything and feel nothing. His wide, haunted eyes in those final moments reflect not rage, but resignation. A man who once reached toward the horizon now realizes the only thing waiting there was the echo of his own despair. 2. He could have had that quiet life in the woods with Mikasa. He saw it. He wanted it. But Eren was never able to live in the present. He chased freedom as if it was always somewhere else, on the other side of a wall, of an ocean, of a genocide. In the end, he became the monster from the legends, the one who tore children from mothers, just as he had once been robbed of his own. And yet, for all his sins, one thing remained true. He knew how to give his heart, not in love or peace, but as a final offering in a world that had no place for a boy like him. The last prayer of a dying world, Shinzou Sasageyo. Dedicate your heart, is more than a battle cry. It is the spiritual heartbeat of Attack on Titan, the incantation that echoes through its most heroic sacrifices and its darkest atrocities. First sung as a hymn of hope, it becomes a dirge, a chilling anthem for the irreversible loss of innocence. Its evolution mirrors the collapse of the ideals it once stood for. At the beginning, it is pure. It stirs the blood of brave souls who, despite knowing they will likely die, march into oblivion with fire in their eyes. This was the golden time of shared sacrifice when death still seemed meaningful because it promised freedom for the next generation. In these early chants, we hear courage, not cruelty, men and women staking everything on the dream of a future no Titan could devour. But Shinzou Sasageyo is also rooted in the language of ritual sacrifice. It is no coincidence that Isayama chose Shinzou over the more metaphorical Kokoro. It is not about offering feelings. It is about offering flesh, hearts as literal gifts to war, to a godless cause, to history's unfeeling churn. This isn't just symbolism. It's the truth of this world. Hearts are indeed torn from chests, thrown into the machine that spins victory from blood. As Eren rises, the cry mutates. It's no longer a call to face the darkness. It becomes the very sound of the darkness. Shinzou Sasageyo morphs into fanaticism. Once a gesture of collective hope, it becomes a rallying cry for annihilation, for blind devotion to a man who's no longer sure if he's a savior or the devil. The soldiers don't just give their hearts anymore. They give up their humanity too. What once evoked the nobility of sacrifice now asks a terrible question. What is left when you've given everything, your future, your morality, your soul, and still the nightmare persists? When the children born of your dreams grow up to burn the world instead of saving it. By the end, Shinzou Sasageyo becomes a lament for all that was lost, the last prayer of a broken people on the edge of extinction. It is screamed into the void by those who still want to believe their deaths mattered. Perhaps that's the most human part of it all, the need to believe that sacrifice has meaning, even when the world proves otherwise. Eren is never freed from his messianic burden. Even as his humanity erodes and his actions grow more monstrous, his legend only intensifies. What began as personal vengeance and spiraled into cosmic determinism becomes, in the eyes of the masses, providence. His power, derived from an ancient curse, is interpreted not as a warning, but as a divine right, as Parada stares down the barrel of global retribution. It crowns him not just as a protector, but as a redeemer. In the absence of visionary leadership, the people of the island find in him the only figure capable of securing their survival, even at the cost of the rest of the world. This desperation gives birth to a darker transformation. Shinzou Sasageyo, once a soldier's vow whispered before death, becomes a weaponized chant of national rebirth. The words lose their intimacy, their purity. They are no longer reserved for the few brave enough to risk their lives for a flicker of peace. Now, they belong to the mob, an angry, frightened population who sing not of freedom, but of dominance. This shift echoes one of history's most chilling parallels, Germany in the 1930s. A wounded nation desperate to reclaim its former pride, seduced by the promise of a strong leader who would restore its greatness. Sieg Heil, too, was once the chant of uniformed men in formation, but it didn't stay that way. It seeped into daily life, into schoolyards and stadiums, into the very identity of a nation. It became the beat of a people who confused power with salvation. So, to it the Yeagerists, who twist Ern's trauma into dogma. What began as a rebellion against power becomes its most brutal enforcement. Civilians and soldiers alike rally around him, not out of understanding, but out of fear, resentment, and indoctrinated faith. The cry of Shinzou Sasageyo becomes the anthem of a people who believe that peace is a lie, unless it is forged by total victory. And so, the language of honor is repurposed to justify genocide. Once it meant, we will die so others may live. Now it means, we will kill so we may live. That is the final tragedy of this phrase. Its complete devolution from spiritual commitment to nationalist fanaticism. The words remain the same, but the soul is gone. The chant that once uplifted humanity becomes the echo of its downfall, and in this echo, we hear not only the story of attack on Titan, but the painful cycles of history repeating themselves. Attack on Titan is a story built on a cycle, hatred feeding hatred, blood answering blood. That's precisely why many fans were unsettled by Isayoma's ending. In a traditional narrative structure, the hero wins or loses, and the world changes accordingly. But Eren's actions, titanic in scope and catastrophic in consequence, don't truly end anything. He doesn't deliver peace. He doesn't erase war. He merely buys time for those he loves to live a little longer and for the world to, perhaps, reflect. In the final moments of his life, having set the apocalypse in motion and then allowed himself to be struck down, Eren hands over what remains to the only person he's ever trusted to look beyond violence, Armin, too. Eren himself doubts the capacity of humanity to escape its destructive impulses, but he clings to the belief that Armin, the boy who always dreamed, always questioned, always understood, can speak to that flickering possibility of peace. Yes, it's naive to believe that words alone can break the cycles of war. But can we really say Eren's sacrifice was in vain? The series' epilogue suggests that some kind of relative peace has persisted for generations. That means something. Not enough, maybe. But more than nothing, Eren is not a god. He is not a devil. He is simply a man burdened with impossible knowledge and inconceivable power, one who did the worst thing imaginable because he wanted to believe that some good might grow from it. A man who surrendered his soul so that others might still have a chance at theirs. When Mikasa and the others stop Eren, they do so not out of hatred, but conviction. In choosing to stand against genocide, they offer humanity something far more precious than vengeance. The model of a world in which enemies fight together to save it from ruin. That final alliance Mikasa, Armin, Renner, Falco, Jean, Connie, and Livad is more powerful than any Titan. They aren't acting under the orders of a crown or a flag. They rise up not for politics, but for principle. In doing so, they become a symbol that resistance to hatred is possible, even when it wears the face of someone you love. The remnants of the Marley Empire renounce their old dogmas, and the children of both factions, raised without the stories of inherited hatred, have a real chance to write something new. This fragile peace is a flower grown in ash. It may not last. It may not even be fair, but it is earned, not through domination, but through dialogue. That, in the end, is attack on Titan's closing plea. If humanity is to survive itself, it must talk. It must remember. It must resist the temptation to answer horror with more horror. We must not forget the last whisper of Marco. Crushed under the rubble of Reiner's betrayal? Why? Why did you do it? Can't we just talk? For all the victims of the past, the children who have become adults will have to pass on their history to preserve their future children from the evils their parents never dared to eradicate. In Attack on Titan, memory is resistance. Livaba, the battle-scarred veteran, trades his blades for lollipops, a quiet, tender symbol of his devotion to the next generation, the one that must be shielded from inherited hatred. In this gesture lies the series' final plea that remembrance is not a burden, but a duty. Eternal peace cannot be assured. It must be built, brick by fragile brick, and defended not with blades, but with truth, compassion, and vigilance. Major Erwin once remarked that perhaps man will only stop fighting when he is the last man on Earth. Our ideals inevitably clash with those of others. We are not evil for this. We are human. Prisoners of our ideologies? Yes. But also their torchbearers. Ideas endure beyond flesh. They can inspire liberation or incite destruction. Some will fight with pens and voices, others with bullets and blood. Isayama, through this sprawling, brutal saga, sketches a vision of humanity steeped in pessimism. Perhaps only a divine tragedy can end the killing. After Eren Yeager's death, a window of peace opens. His friends live long, full lives. Mikasa finds comfort in love and memory, never forgetting the boy buried beneath their childhood tree. Yet the paradise Eren sacrificed everything for does not hold. The final chapter delivers a cruel irony. The same island, years later, prepares for war again, draped in the same militaristic symbols that once cloaked history's darkest chapters. The mission of peace fails. Hatred outlives even the Titans. Technology advances, cities rise, bombs fall. The cycle repeats. In the closing images, a child walks through the ruins of Paratus, hand in paw with his dog. The earth is scorched. Towers have crumbled. And yet, the boy finds something. A colossal tree, strikingly similar to the one Ymir entered thousands of years before. This tree, ancient and mysterious, emerges once again as if summoned by humanity's descent into chaos. A reminder, perhaps, that the Titans were never truly destroyed. That they are not merely creatures, but reflections, echoes of us. The story that began with Ymir and ended with Eren may not be an end at all. Perhaps Ymir was not the first child to meet the entity at the base of that tree. Perhaps Eren will not be the last to take up the curse. The Titans are not linear, they are cyclical. They are the divine punishment for mankind's addiction to bloodshed. Each attack Titan is not a savior, but a symptom, a fevered dream of freedom that births new horrors. Where does it begin? Where does it end? No one knows. But one truth remains: as long as there are men, there will be Titans.